We previously defined the idea of genetic equilibrium, stating that it was possible for populations to remain the same, but that those possibilities were based on a set of circumstances, such as no migration, no mutation, and if you could meet all of those qualifications, it was possible for a population to continuously stay the same. Well, if those are the things that allow a population to stay the same, what are the forces that would cause a population to come out of genetic equilibrium and therefore evolve, therefore change? And one of those factors would, of course, be mutation. Mutation introduces variety to a population. We were defining mutation here as the accidental change in a DNA sequence. And of course, as DNA changes, so too do the traits that are presented by those particular organisms. What I'm trying to do on this particular slide is to put mutations into categories and explain whether or not they would help a population evolve. And we're going to define those mutations as being one of three possible categories: positive, neutral, or negative. What does it mean for a mutation to be positive? Of course, a mutation is still a mistake, but it's a mistake that could help. If a mutation provides an individual with help or some sort of advantage that others in the population lack, then that individual should live and live longer, and therefore have the chance to reproduce, and therefore pass on that mutation that was inherited by them. On the flip side, negative, what happens if a mutation provides a disadvantage so that an individual has trouble surviving, trouble acquiring the natural resources that are necessary to live? Well, the most likely outcome for that individual would be death, and therefore taking that mutation, taking that inferior trait with it. In between the two, there is the possibility of neutrality. It's possible that a change in DNA occurs, but that trait would not provide any sort of help or hindrance, no positive or negative that would impact the lifespan of that particular individual. Now, keep in mind, these three categories are all based on context. They're all based on the particular situation. What exactly is a positive versus a negative mutation? Well, that depends on the circumstance an individual finds themselves in. For instance, to have like a dark brown or green coloring is great if you live in the forest, but it's awful if you live in the desert. So everything is based on context. It's great to have thick fur if you live in a cold environment, but that would be a terrible disadvantage when living in a hot environment. So positive, neutral, and negative really depends upon where an individual finds themselves and what sort of habitat they happen to be living in. Another force of evolution, which could cause a population to come out of genetic equilibrium, would be migration. And here we're defining migration in two ways. There are immigrants and emigrants. Immigration simply means an individual moving into a population, and emigration moving out. If you look at the picture to the right here with these beetles, you can see that there's a population on the left of green and a population on the right of tan-colored beetles. And one of the tan-colored beetles seems to be moving into the population of green. Well, that immigration-emigration idea is all a matter of perspective. Those tan beetles would consider the one that is leaving an emigrant, whereas the green beetles would consider that same tan beetle that's entering their population as an immigrant. Either way, emigration or immigration, that beetle leaving one population and entering another is changing both populations. It is bringing its genes into the green population. It's most likely at some point going to mate, and it perhaps will pass on that tan color. How successful is that tan color? Maybe a couple of generations from now, a high percentage of that population will be tan instead of green, and that population will have changed. It will have evolved. But that beetle also left the tan population to the right. Maybe it was the only beetle that had very good eyesight, and it has now left that population. And so its genes for that good eyesight have left that population. And so it too has changed the tan population. Maybe not in terms of the color of the beetle, but in terms of some other trait. A third force of evolution is something referred to as genetic drift. This is a little bit strange. Genetic drift is defined, as you can see here, as the change in a small population due to chance. Look at the diagram, look at the picture, and you can see that originally on the far left, we have a population of 9 beetles. Let me point out, that's a small population. You can see that of the 9, 3 of them are green. In other words, 33% of the population is green. You can then see in the middle diagram there that somebody has walked past and accidentally, and I do stress accidentally, stepped on 2 of the green beetles, killing them, which leaves a population with only 7 individuals and only 1 of which is green. So the population of green beetles has gone from 33% down to about 14%. That's a pretty drastic change in the course of 2 seconds. So a change in a small population due to chance. And now let me emphasize that word chance. Did that person who stepped on the green beetles step on them and kill them because they were green? Was it a disadvantageous situation for them to be green, or was it just chance? Somebody was walking down a sidewalk and crunch, happened to step on 2 beetles and never even noticed. That drastically changed, due to chance, the gene frequencies within that particular population. That population has changed in a matter of seconds. In a large population, would that have been the case? If there was 9,000 beetles instead of 9, and 1/3 of them were green, and somebody walking down the street happened to step on 2 green beetles, would that have had a big impact or change on that population? Well, no. But small populations can have big fluctuations just based on chance. A little corollary to this idea of genetic drift is this concept of founder's effect. It follows the same premise. Future generations of, again, a small population can be heavily influenced by the original founding members of that population. Again, small and due to chance. Now let's think of an example that really fits close to home where we live here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. About an hour and a half to the east of us is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Lancaster is well known for its fairly large, but in the grand scheme of things, small Amish population. That population of Amish families that live in the Lancaster area moved there. They established or founded that community in somewhere in approximately like the 1700s. It was just a few dozen families that happened to start that Amish population in Lancaster, PA. Well, it just so happened that one of the founding members of that population, by chance, happened to have a genetic disorder called Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome. That particular genetic syndrome is one in which dwarfism results. It leads to problems with the hands. Oftentimes there are abnormalities with a person's heart. And today, hundreds of years later, because of the founding members of a small population and due to chance, there are many current Amish families that have Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome within. It was just random chance, but because very few people ever leave that population, and certainly very few people ever enter that population as a small, fairly closed population, founder's effect has had a big impact.